Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 162 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining me for another interview episode where we track down the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that we can share their secrets with you. This time around, we're heading south of the border with philanthropist, bar owner, and author Ivy Mix. She's the co-founder of Speed Rack, which is an incredible series of charitable bartending competitions that feature amazing women behind the bar and raise money for breast cancer research. And she also owns and runs Leyenda, a cocktail bar in Brooklyn featuring Latin spirits and flavors. And as if that wasn't already enough to keep her busy, Ivy's new book, Spirits of Latin America, is one of the most exciting new books to hit the shelves this year. She's here to tell us exactly why we should be so excited about the agave, cane, and grape distillates that dominate Central and South American cocktail culture. But first, let's take a moment and give you the chance to make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Pancho Pedico, designed by Leyenda bartender Shannon Ponch and featured in the cane section of Ivy's book. To make it, you'll need 1 1/4 ounces of agricole rum, which is a style made from cane juice rather than molasses, 3/4 of an ounce of bourbon, 1/2 ounce of manzanilla sherry. Ivy recommends a brand called Leyenda, which I can confirm is indeed delicious. 1 1/4 ounces of Poblano pepper syrup, which I'll cover here in a moment. 1/2 ounce of pineapple juice and 3/4 of an ounce of lime juice. Combine all these ingredients in a cocktail shaker with ice, give it a good hearty shake, then strain into a Collins glass over crushed or pebble ice, garnish with a lime wheel, and enjoy. To make that Poblano pepper syrup, Ivy recommends destemming 8 Poblano peppers but leaving in the seeds for a bit of extra spice, then juicing those until you have about 2 cups of pepper juice. Pepper juice, an ingredient that I don't often see behind the bar. Add that to a blender with 1 cup of agave syrup, blend until integrated, then bottle and refrigerate. What I love about the Pancho Pedico cocktail is its expert balance of multiple sweeteners and acids. You've got sweet notes from the rum, bourbon, and poblano syrup, acid from the manzanilla sherry and the lime juice, and then the 1/2 ounce of pineapple juice that straddles the line between sweet. Personally, I'm a green drink guy, especially when it's summertime. So if you're looking for a gorgeous highball that'll blow your guests away this Labor Day weekend, I'd recommend grabbing the ingredients for the Pancho Pedico. It's not the simplest drink, but in the words of everyone's favorite amphibian role model, it's not easy being green. So, now that you're fueled up for this trip to Mexico, Brazil, and beyond, let's turn our attention back to the interview. In this flavorful conversation with Ivy Mix, author of Spirits of Latin America, some of the topics we discuss include Ivy's background in the bar world, including her philanthropic work as co-founder of Speed Rack, how Spirits of Latin America is tied intimately to Leyenda, a pan-Latin bar that Ivy designed in partnership with Julie Reiner of Clover Club, why this book is as much a travelogue as it is a cocktail book. Yes, there are recipes, and yes, there's information on different spirits, but the soul of the book is also rooted in people and place. We dig into all this at great length. An interesting perspective shift in the form of a case study on the Havana, Cuba bartending scene, where bartenders tend to have more advanced degrees than their clients. We also dig really deep into Ivy's cocktail workshopping practices at Leyenda, which generated a number of cocktails in her book. It's almost impossible to summarize except to say that she incorporates spreadsheets, improv, mad libs, and formal art crits. It sounds insane, but it's completely interesting and exceptionally compelling. To cap it all off, we talk about bar hacks for getting esoteric booze in the quarantine era, the romance of split-based cocktails, the problem with everyone wanting to be a National Geographic photographer, what to drink with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and much more. This conversation, if anything, reveals why so many people in the hospitality world look up to Ivy Mix as a person who brings quality to the table in every possible way. Yes, we need to ignore the fact that in my imaginary bartender wrestling league, she has the perfect name for a cage match contender. And yes, we also need to find some way to sublimate our insane jealousy of her travels throughout the agave, cane, and grape regions of Latin America. But if you pick up her book, you just might find the solution in one of her many innovative and painstakingly polished cocktails. Please enjoy this illuminating and expertly balanced interview with philanthropist, bar owner, and author, Ivy Mix. Ivy, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So before we jump into all of the various spirits of Latin America, the varieties of Latin American spiritual experience, we might say, why don't you just introduce yourself for our listeners and give us some of the things that you did maybe before you came out with this book?
Sure. So my name is Ivy Mix. I am a bartender and bar owner. I own and operate a bar called Leyenda in Brooklyn, New York. And I also started about 10 years ago an all-female bartending competition called Speed Rack, which kind of has two pillars. We simultaneously raise a platform for women in this predominantly male-dominated industry. And we also raise money for breast cancer research and prevention. So in the 10 years, almost 10 years we've been doing this, we've raised just over $1 million, which is great. We are on, we're not doing it right now, obviously, because of the times that we're in. You can't really get upwards of 1,000 bartenders screaming in a room together. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Leyenda, Speed Rack. I've been in the industry for about, too long to say, 16 years I've been bartending, which is a long time. And I've been in the cocktail scene since about 2009.
Nice. Yeah, I think last time you were on the Speakeasy, you were right about to crack that $1 million mark. So congrats on finally eclipsing that.
Thank you.
And before we move on to talk about the book, I really do want to emphasize for our listeners, about half of whom are, home bartenders as opposed to industry folks. I really want to emphasize the impact that Speed Rack has had on the industry, because not only is it a huge event that has, evolved to take place in multiple cities across multiple countries. Not only has it raised $1 million, but I mean, it's sort of it's the one event that my bartender friends get most excited about during the entire year. They have their cocktail competitions where they're all kind of going up against one another, but the Speed Rack competition is, I think, the one that people are most excited about, not just the people who are attending or not just, I should say, the people who are competing, but the people who are just out there to support and raise money. It's the time that I sense in my bartender friends the most excitement. So for what it's worth, it's a huge deal.
Yeah. It's we call it Bartender Christmas. Like every day people are like, Happy Speed Rack Day! And like everyone's kind of like, getting together. It's really fun. It gives people a reason, especially the volunteers, just to get together and work for, it's like, hey, we could raise $25,000 today. Let's get into it. So it's really fun.
Yeah, I like that. A temporally and geographically floating Bartender Christmas.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. This is exciting. You have a new book out, Spirits of Latin America, and I'd love for you to just kind of give us the big picture story. Like, how did you decide that this was the book you wanted to write? Did the book choose you? And then we can kind of dig into things like the way it was structured, the places that you traveled to be able to, visit these places and meet the people who are making these spirits. And then, of course, also the beautiful and delicious cocktails that are featured in the book. So just give us some of those big picture overview items first, and then I guess we'll get into the details.
Sure. So, it all kind of started, I'm kind of like a project oriented person. I feel like every 3 to 4 years, I'm like, okay, I got that. Now let's do something else. It's like add something else to the pile. So, like 4 or 5 years after starting Speed Rack, I opened Leyenda. And then about 2 or 3 years after opening Leyenda, I was like, well, now what? Do I open another bar? Like what's the plan? And I was approached about writing a book by a wonderful woman named Emily Timberlake, who used to run 10 Speed Press. And she was like, what would you like to write about? And my, my response was like, well, I can tell you what I don't really want to write about. And I don't really want to write about what it's like to be a woman in the industry. At that point, I was frequently kind of like the de facto voice of women for a long time. And I found that to be like more annoying. Because kind of the whole point of Speed Rack is to have like, here's all these women, look at them all. There's so many, And I was like, why me? But also I built my career off that, which was great. But I was kind of like, okay, I have other interests that are, ancillary to being a feminist, So Leyenda, the book really goes back to when we opened Leyenda. So we opened Leyenda in 2015. And we opened it in like 6 months, almost no time. And I partnered with Julie Reiner, who was my boss for many years and mentor. And she asked me, hey, do you want to open up this bar? It's the same landlord as Clover Club, which is directly across the street where I worked for 4 years. And she was like, but I just want to open up something that's not Clover Club, something different. How about we open up a tequila and mezcal bar? And I was like, no, I don't really want to open up a tequila and mezcal bar. I've been to so many tequila and mezcal bars, and most of them suck. And most of them are like cultural appropriation rather than cultural celebration. And it's like, like Cinco de Mayo, chimichanga, sombrero, burrito. It's like just not really, it's not genuine half the time. And I spent a lot of my life traveling throughout Latin America. So not just Mexico, but like Central South America, parts of the Caribbean. And even like working at Clover Club, for instance, like whenever we did a new menu and it was time to submit a drink, I very rarely was the whiskey drink submission. I was like the pisco and the cachaça, So I've always been drawn to those flavors in that part of the world. And yeah, so when Julie was like, let's open a bar, I was like, okay, how about we open up pan-Latin inspired bar? So not using kind of the popularity of agave spirits as a gateway, but then being able to introduce people to these really complex and awesome spirits. So when I came to writing the book, I was like, I want to do the same thing. I want to give people knowledge that I actually can't find. So the thing that I found and the reason why I'm really proud about the book is that there's no book like it. Like I couldn't just pick up another book and be like, oh, I'll just read that one and educate myself on this. I had to like steal my cousin. She's a professor and she gave me her JSTOR login. Remember JSTOR from college? Mm-hmm. So I would like read all these academic anthropological essays about, agriculture in the new world, I say with air quotes, And so that's how I picked the subject of the book. Like, okay, I can't find this book. I want to write this book. And I want to really discuss what makes, I think, these categories of spirits a category beyond what their base material is, but based on their geographical location.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really fascinating book in terms of the organizational structure because it is both loose and tight in a number of ways. I mean, it's loose in that if you look at the table of contents, you're like, okay, there's 3 things here. Agave, cane, right. and then grapes. It's like, okay, that doesn't tell me a whole lot about what I'm going to be experiencing, but I like that this sort of loose structure is also quasi-geographical, right? Agave is kind of in this region, cane is kind of in this clump over here, and then grapes are kind of in a slightly different clump. So you have a sort of geographical, natural organization there. And then, obviously there's the travelogue aspect. You did a lot of traveling to be able to put this together. And in one respect, I imagine being a bartender, being a high-profile bartender in a high-profile cocktail city and having access to these brands and these reps was probably useful in that, but that only gets you one step of the way. So can you talk a little bit about the process of research that happened, I guess, on the ground as opposed to in JSTOR?
Yeah. Yeah. So writing a book, I know you've talked to different authors on this podcast, is really hard. And, there was definitely parts where they were like, listen, you're being too esoteric and this is too, you got to not be. So I went to university. I was a philosophy major in university. So it's like, they're like, you got to tone that shit down and make it a little bit more approachable. And I was like, okay. But so the way we did it first was we did a lot of research going in, like doing the JSTOR stuff. And then it's like, all right, we need to go do feet on the ground research here. And there were certain categories that I knew better that I've been more infiltrated in for more of my life. Like, I get the whole reason why I'm in this industry at all is because of agave distillates and mezcal in particular. So those connections I already had, right? So it's like, okay, write someone. If I don't know this person who I want to see personally, I know someone who does. And I can go and travel around, different parts of Mexico. And I've probably already been to lots of these places and then just like research and develop and blah, blah. And then there are other places where I'm like, I don't really have any connections down there. I mean, some, because I know, like you said, like I know some brands, but in lots of different parts of this part of the world, the brands that we have in the United States of America are not the same brands. They're purely for export, right? So you kind of have to use your different connections and just making sure that I was talking to people who really wanted to educate about the category and not just their brand, right? So for instance, like last night I just did an event with Novo Fogo Cachaça. I partnered with Navy Strength. We did a little like book launch thing virtually, of course. But I went down to Brazil for like, I don't even know, like 7 days a week or 10 days, something like this. And I spent most of my time with Novo Fogo and then a little bit of my time with these guys who make Yaguara Cachaça. And I went to go see a bunch of other producers. And that was a really fun thing, right? It was just like, okay, like there's us, here's this guy, and he's not even like on the map of making cachaça because you can read it in the book, but like there's a lot of underground cachaça production that has lots to do with taxes and what have you. And then while I was there, I would meet their friend. Oh, you got to meet my friend who does this thing. So it kind of, exponentially grew from there. And it was really fascinating and interesting, But I really relied heavily on the people that I knew, Everywhere I went, I was like, I could like contact someone and be like, hey, it's Ivy. I know Diego. Diego isn't here because he couldn't come, but like we're supposed to be in contact. So we'd like meet at a coffee shop and then that would be like my guide, right? Because, the nice thing is that people were excited to have this book be written because there have been quite a amount of books on rum and a few books on tequila, but, there haven't been like, especially people like who have cachaça or pisco or singani or like some of these other distillates that are like, oh my God, this is good. Like I want to share this knowledge of what this category of spirits are.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were saying earlier about having to kind of tone down some of the what some people maybe in the publishing landscape would consider to be esoteric nuances, right? But you don't feel bad, because a couple weeks ago I talked about virtue ethics versus utilitarianism in agave farming with Lou Bank and Chava from Agave Road Trip. So we like all that stuff here, but it's one of the things that I like about the book is that kind of interspersed at kind of smart locations in the book relative to the rest of the narrative that you're telling about the cane, the agave, or the grape. You have these little kind of call out pages where it's like a page or most of a page where you take a single topic, and a book that actually came to mind when I saw that move was Souther Teague's I'm Just Here for the Drinks, where he'll kind of do a similar thing where he'll call out one topic, and it's great because it kind of breaks up the read a little bit. It gives you a little bit of contrast with the rest of what's going on. What are some examples of like those little call out things that maybe you learned while you were down there, or like just like little ways to think about things that might pique our listeners' interest? I don't know if that's a clear question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The first one that comes to my mind is the one that's called Soy Cantinero, about the Havana, Cuba Bartenders Association. I had never been to Cuba when I went for the book. As you can imagine, Cuba is a very interesting country, given its history and its communist culture. It was totally different than I anticipated it to be. It's one of those things that, I think that especially as Americans, we romanticize so heavily Cuba, because it's you can't go there, or couldn't go there until recently. And there's a few streets that are really beautiful in Cuba, and a lot of it is just outright horrible poverty. And like a lot of Latin America has a decent amount of poverty to it, but Cuba was I was for some reason more struck by it. Probably also because I was come on, socialism, this is what you're supposed to not do, And when I was there, Havana is also the one place in Latin America that actually has a cocktail history. Most of our Latin American cocktails that we think about, like the Pisco Sour, is basically a West Coast California cocktail. Margarita probably comes from Texas. All these different things come from different places. So, except for Havana, Cuba, who has endless, the Hemingway Daiquiri, the Mojito, the Hotel Nacional, this goes on and on. And I went there with Julio, who owns La Clover, and I went with him, and he's Cuban, and we were talking, and he was most people who you see in these bartending positions are actually some of the most educated people in Cuba. I already knew this when I lived in Guatemala, but Cuba has some of the best doctors in the world. Their medical program there is really, really good. But because of the way their system works, they don't make any money. So you meet all of these people who were, Julio was an engineer. You know all these people who are doctors. You meet all these people who have insane degrees, who, because you can get tips, can make more money in a day than you can in a week or a month, And I thought that was just so interesting. And there was a great deal of pride in the position and in the work of being a bartender there that I thought was just really awesome. Because, when I first started doing this, everyone was well, what else do you do? Are you a struggling actress? Are you a struggling, musician? Are you a struggling artist? What else do you do? And I was yeah, I have an art studio, but this is what I do. This is my job. This is what I'm working hard to be good at. So that was a real, really eye-opening and really awesome to see the level of pride and the level of dedication to the craft. And it was pretty great. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of brings us back to not the origin of bartending, of course, but sort of the first big publication, Jerry Thomas, the professor, right? Kind of an academic, almost like a, it's funny. I think today we have this impression of the bartender as, for good reason, like almost like a servant, a server, somebody who's here to serve you, to kind of be invisible when you want them to be invisible and to be there when you want them to be there. And that's fine. That's hospitality. That's kind of, what the hospitality industry is there to provide a given person on a given day. But it's interesting to also have, that feel where, you walk into the bar and you can use the bartender as a resource. And I think that two things: A, perfect example of what I was talking about, because nobody, like none of us would have been able to glean that fact because we haven't done the work and gone to Cuba and found a bartender who knows it well enough to be a guide for us. So I think that's a perfect illustration of precisely the value of what you put together in this book. And then, also it's a fantastic perspective shift, and I think, why do we travel? We travel to get away. We travel to find ourselves in a different place. And I think, it's so funny with the times that we're in. I just see Central and South America as being more and more attractive because, A, it's connected to the U.S. Our trade is not, stuck in foreign ports. We can get stuff here, so in terms of the availability of these spirits, I think we have an advantage during this pandemic. And, I just think that, traveling closer to home is going to be what people do in the next several years. So I think it comes out at a bad time, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. But I think that there are some good things about that. Did you have to deal with any pandemic related stuff while you were traveling, or did you manage to get this all in before?
I got all in before, so I actually finished my travel basically exactly a year before COVID hit, for the book, which was, obviously, like, thank God. I will say, two things based on that point. Number one, when we first started to make this book, and part of my goal of it was, Trump had just been elected, and there was all this talk about, one of his election things was like putting pictures out of like, look at these horrible immigrants coming from the South, like, we're going to build a wall and keep them out. And, and I was just like, Jesus Christ, this is so crazy. And I really believe that people need to eat, you don't need to drink, but it is fun. And you can really understand people, you can get a little glimmer, a little insight into different people's cultures based off what they eat and drink. And my hope was that in this book that people could really get a look into that. And the other thing I said was I took a lot of inspiration out of all books from the Franklin Barbecue book, which is one of the best-selling cookbooks of all time. And in it, they teach you how to make their massive smoker, which no one will ever do. Maybe 1% of people actually made that smoker. You know what I'm saying? Because it's so insane. And yet, everyone bought this book. So I was like, okay, I don't expect everyone to go hop on an airplane and travel for 4 months or 5 months like I did, because it's not realistic, but fun. But my whole idea was like I wanted to be like armchair voyeurism, and that was before COVID. And now COVID's here, and I'm like, well, now even more so. Like, you can't go somewhere. Like, you probably can't go to Bolivia, but you can go and pick up a bottle of Sangani, and like kind of transport yourself there.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I'm guessing in the second or third or the next printing of this book is going to have like a schematic of those 500-year-old stills at Demerara Distilling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay. Well, I'll start building up some karma at the hardware store down the street and see if they can supply me with the necessary tropical woods. So I think this would be a great time to transition back to Leyenda. Talk a little bit about the program that you built there, because obviously there was a conversation between the program that you built at Leyenda and then also the cocktails from the book. I imagine that there was it was a fertile testing ground for some of these drinks. So can you walk us through, I guess, just a little bit more about the program at Leyenda? How do you try and structure your menu there? What kind of flavors do you strive for? And then kind of how that bled into the book?
Sure. The kind of handy thing about having Leyenda be Pan-Latin inspired is there are certain categories, certain spirits, certain places where I'm like, gotta hit those. Like, okay, do I have my, jalapeno infused tequila drink? Do I have my pisco drink? Do I have my cachaça drink? Like there's certain things I have to be like, do I got it? And if I don't have it, then I have to put it on there. So I actually, so I'm a visual person. I have an Excel sheet where I have different spirits, and then different like categorized flavor profiles, like creamy, spicy, fruity, sweet, kind of like this. Then it's like refreshing, stirred, boozy, stirred, light, and so I can look at it. And what I need to see after I have a menu is like little dots, equispaced across the entire sheet. So when I first started myself, I did all the drinks myself. And it's hilarious. On our first nights of friends and family, I realized that every single one of our drinks was pink. Like, what have I done? You don't see them until they're all together. But now when we started, I kind of took the Clover Club vibe, and like so many different cocktail bars out there, we have like a submission process. So what I would do is I'd keep my little graph, right? And I'd take drinks off, and then I'd see spaces that were empty. So I'd write my bartending staff and be like, take different categories. It's almost like doing like an ad lib, like here's your noun, here's your verb, here's your adjective, right? Like take one from each category, from each column, and then make a drink, So it's like, okay, I have pisco, I have bitter, I have stirred. Okay, go forth, and then you got to make this drink. And the rest of it's kind of up to you, And then we do a big R&D, like we do different crits. So I said I was a philosophy major. I was also a fine art as a double major in college. So it was kind of like an art crit. Like you kind of like go in, you crit it, you work on it. And like that's the one thing about the book. People are like, well, all of these ingredients are so specific. I'm like, well, right, because we sit there and we're like, I'm not sure if that dry vermouth is the best dry vermouth for this drink. Let's try this dry vermouth. Does it make it a bad drink if you use a different dry vermouth? It does not. It will be fine. But these are the steps that we take to try to make the best drinks that we can. And we also opened Leyenda. And when I opened, it was really important to me to take people from kind of different schools of thought. So, you can kind of like look in the history of the bartending world. You can kind of see like different family trees trickle down. And I didn't want to have people just from the Julie Reiner tree. That'd be easier for me because that's, my tree. But I wanted to branch out. So, our bar director now, his name is Jesse Harris. He learned from Sasha Petrowski. And, I had a whole bunch of people that were from Julie, obviously. But then I had like Tristan Wiley, and he used to work for Dave Arnold, and people from a whole different slew. I had like some Death & Co. people. And the cool thing about that is that when we did critiques, everyone came in with their own stuff. Because, once you're in the same family, it's like, oh, I always use the Massenet creme de pêche. There's no other kind out there. And then someone's like, well, what about this cool shit? Like, look, try this one. And you're like, oh, wow. So you can kind of like expand your horizons and your interests. So it's kind of a long-winded answer to a short question. But the cocktails are such an important, they're obviously they're like what I do. Sometimes in the book, they were a bit of, not an afterthought, I want to say, but I was so into the history and it's so important for me to talk about that I was like, okay, like we really got to talk about this. And the cocktails, it was actually a struggle for a little bit to figure out how to interweave these cocktails into all the copy of this book. You notice that, that the cocktails are after each section. So they're after agave, after sugarcane, after grape. They're not all in one compartment, which I really liked, but that was a struggle. And it was like, how do we put these in here and how we make it work? And at Leyenda, it's not that big of a deal because it's not like, we're not sitting there like reciting the book to anyone who sits down. It's kind of like people have to, ask questions about it. But yeah.
Yeah, I personally love that structure because what it reminds me of is something called a capping phrase. If you've ever read like a Zen koan, these like little philosophical riddle parables that you're supposed to meditate on. The way that they're presented in the texts is that they call it the main case is presented, and then they have little capping phrases on there by the translators or the scholars who compiled these. And so it's meta commentary. And so in a certain respect, the cocktails at the end of each section are kind of there to help us develop and integrate some of the things that you've worked through the sections with. And I really enjoy that because it's it's learning without learning. It's like eating a healthy dessert almost. It's because you're developing your knowledge, but it just feels like you're making a drink. So I love that. I'm so glad that I asked that question. You were able to explain the way you develop these cocktails in the bar, because I was trying to figure out a way to explain why these cocktails are special, and what you were saying about like, well, is this the perfect dry vermouth? We're not going to, as home bartenders, as people who buy this book, we're not going to go through that process. No. And so part of the polish of it, sort of like the coat of wax on the car that makes it shine, but that we can't see because it's clear, is the fact that you did all this work and now we don't have to. So if I do have that vermouth available in my market, well, great. It's maybe $2 extra than the kind of middle of the road thing sitting next to it. Great. I'll spring for $2 because the other cocktails I've made from this book have been incredible. So I think that really develops it as a really finely tuned resource. So it's more of a performance vehicle for us home bartenders who are maybe not used to driving such sexy recipes in our own homes. That's a weird mixed metaphor.
Yeah, but no, yeah. But I would also say, like, one of the interesting things about right now, like, depending on where your listeners live, and I've been telling this to people, like, if you're like, I do not want to go out and buy a whole bottle of X, you can go to your bar and ask to buy a few ounces. Like, go to your favorite bar. If you've got a favorite cocktail bar, be like, hey, do you have any Genepi? Because it's weird shit and I don't know where to find it. And they'll be like, and literally, I mean, as a bar owner, I can tell you, if it's legal where you live, I will guarantee you that your bartender will be happy to sell you a few ounces of some weird stuff. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah, with everybody doing to go, obviously, yeah, there's a lot of regulations that have been relaxed. Now, I do want to just quickly return to the way that you workshop these cocktails, because this is an unknown to me coming into this, and I'm just fascinated by it because I don't have an art background, but I do have a poetry creative writing background, and I ran workshops at the University of Maryland for a number of years, and I love the idea of just, we would circle up the desks in a circle and just, part of it obviously is, like any crit or anytime you put your work, your art on display for the rest of the class to kind of pick apart and analyze, it's a little, kind of nerve wracking. It's very personal. You've spent time doing this. But you derive all this from a spreadsheet that's almost like a set of improv inputs, right? It's like, all right, you need Pisco boozy or Pisco bitter stirred. It's just, I'm fascinated by how you've been able to take so many different, almost like approaches to constructing a drink, right? There's the spreadsheet approach, there's the workshop approach, and then there's the kind of like improv aspect of it. And it's like somehow like all of those things fuse to be really useful. Did you develop that on your own, or are there other bases for that in the bar world?
Well, I think that I don't know anyone else who does it necessarily that way that I do it. I think also, when we first opened Leyenda, and even with the book, I told everyone, I was like, listen, we are selling things that it's not like we're selling vodka and gin and bourbon. We're selling things that people don't know what it is necessarily, let alone know how to pronounce it. So we have to, the way our menu is worded, the way we construct our cocktails, different things have to be, we have to give people as much information as humanly possible, so they feel comfortable ordering a drink, because, no one wants to feel like an idiot. That's the last thing someone wants to do. No one likes to flaunt their ignorance and be like, I'm sorry, I don't know what Madre Quiche is. I'm like, oh, it's an agave dummy, like you don't, we need to be open and kind of hand holding. So a lot of what we did also, and I guess I never really realized it until I wrote the book and someone called it out. We do a lot of split bases. And I always thought that this is like, of course, but we, rather than your base spirit is usually the thing that's over 80 proof. And we do a lot of splitting those amongst more traditional spirits. So, and then sometimes even within the same Latin American category. So like we'll do Jamaican rum and bourbon, some sort of old fashioned, right? And then we'll do like gin and pisco, or we'll do, Spanish brandy and, blah. And I think that that way you give people an in. They look and they're like, don't know that, do you know that, love watermelon, gonna get that drink,
Right.
So yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your questions kind of a roundabout way.
No, it's I mean the process is really important, I think, and that's kind of why we take a good long time to break it down, because it's a great book just on the surface, but when you really learn like all the little nuances of how it was constructed and why you made the decisions you made, I mean it just makes it even better. So I guess we'll wrap up the main portion of the interview here by asking it, now that you've had a little bit of time to step away, time to consider this as a somewhat completed project, even though, books are sort of never really feel completely done. There's always more to do, promote the book, edit the book, different edition. But like now that you've had a little bit of space from it, did you change in any way in terms of the way you think about spirits and cocktails here in the US as somebody who's actually putting them on bars in front of customers?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing that I think is important is with Latin American spirits, there tends to be this tendency to romanticize the poverty of the people who are making these spirits. So it's like, okay, here's this guy with little chanclas sandals on in the middle of the desert, chopping down an agave with his bare hand and putting it on a donkey. And this is so, look how amazing this is. And isn't it so rustic? And like, this would be great on my Instagram feed. And kind of like everyone wants to be a National Geographic photographer. And I'm not saying that that's not beautiful. And yes, part of the things about these spirits is they have been done in the same way for so long, but there are ways to maintain authenticity without having it be at the expense of a great group of people, right? So, lots of these places have been struggling to keep their tradition alive. And it's not like, lots of people are like, yeah, I could have gone and become like some sort of engineer or something, but I didn't. I stayed in this tiny town and I'm doing my thing. Or, yeah, I went to school, but now I came back to do this. This is my family's tradition and I'm going to keep it alive. But I became very aware of this romanticism and kind of how unfortunate it is, and the perpetuating of it that I find to be, annoying. And, just looking back, and still when I see people coming into my bar and trying to sell me some spirits and they have these pictures of people doing this back-breaking work, which is really hard because, in the end of the day, spirits are just agricultural products. Like that's like kind of the deal. And they're beautiful photos, right? And it's great, but I'm just like, okay, and now here, you ask certain questions and you're like, well, like, how much is that guy getting paid? So I became much more aware. It's almost like a regret. Like, how was I not more aware, before, but definitely becoming more aware of, we should be paying money for the things that we're drinking. Like, these are historical little nuggets that are still available. They're very much in danger of being lost because of greed and desire for quantity over quality. So pay pay and ask the right questions. That's what I would say. Certainly saw some things in my travels where I was like, if you could be doing anything else, would you still be doing this? And some people were like, no. And some people were like, yes, I would still be doing this. Like, this is what I love to do. So my hope is that we can pay people enough and do enough and because there is a great pride. Everyone has a pride over this cultural piece of their, heritage and their life. And just making sure that people are a little bit treated better because the juice is good,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that too. And that's, like in one respect, that's a tough mindset to try and cultivate because those National Geographic style pictures are just sexy. They're fun to look at. They're compelling in a certain way. On the other hand, it's really not all that hard to kind of flip a switch in your mind and be like, if I have the expendable income to drink, well, I should have the expendable income to pay for it a little bit more. It's weird because we're always looking for a deal, right? We get a dopamine hit when we get a deal. But if you can maybe just tweak that slightly and maybe try and reward yourself with a different type of little brain chemical hit by doing something good with the money that you're spending and really targeting it. I think it's going to be tough because the dopamine hit's just easier. But I do think that, if you really put your mind to it and slow down when you're at the bar or at the liquor store, then I think that's not so far outside of the realm of imagination that we can maybe start making some small incremental change in that direction. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Before we jump into a few quick lightning rounds here, anything else you want to share with folks about the book? Any preferred places where they can purchase it? Any of that?
Yeah, well, you can purchase it through Leyenda. You can purchase it through my website. You can purchase it through Amazon, although, the one person who's made money during COVID is Bezos, so, but it is on sale on Amazon, I will say that. And, every time someone buys it on Amazon, it goes up the charts. And, part of me is like, buy it on Amazon. The other part of me is like, no, don't. But I always say support your local bookstore. My hope is that if you live in Chicago or Miami and you contact your favorite independent bookstore and I really want to get this book, maybe they'll pick up 3, and then someone else will get it. So yeah, support local, shop local, and then review it on Amazon. Even though you didn't buy it there.
Interesting. I like that. That's a good little hack. Good little hack. All right. Just a couple little lightning round questions. I know that you have a heart out here, so let's just do a couple here. What is your favorite cocktail? And if you don't have a favorite of all time, what's something you've more recently fallen in love with?
My favorite cocktail, ironically enough, because it doesn't have a Latin spirit in it, is a Negroni. I love it because it's one of the hardest drinks to completely screw up, but it's also one of the hardest drinks to completely perfect. And going back to the vermouth question, which vermouth, which gin, how are you going to do it? What's your proportions, And I can get in a dive bar and I can get it in a fancy cocktail bar and I'll probably be pretty happy with it.
True. And it's great for split bases, right?
Yes, there you go. Exactly.
All right. If you could have a cocktail with anyone in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you drink? Just kind of paint us a picture.
I would have a drink with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I would have a martini with her. I do my martinis, not because she's old, but I drink my martinis, I call them grandma style, 50-50 with a lemon twist and an olive. And I think I would go to the Carlisle in Midtown.
All right. Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah.
What would she drink?
Oh, Jesus. Probably the same. Could you see her drinking a martini?
Yeah, I can.
Or just like an old fashioned. Let's just give her a big, or just a Scotch neat.
Ooh, yeah, I could see that. With the bars, one really nice crystal rocks glass. Yeah,
exactly.
I like it. Okay, beautiful. What's an unusual or controversial view or belief that you hold in the spirits and cocktail world?
I don't like a dimly lit bar. Hate it. Too dark is not good. One of my favorite things about COVID, the silver lining is that all of these speakeasies that were like hidden underneath carpets now have to be out in the street, and everyone has to find them, and it's clearly lit, and I can read the menu. Like, I'm not like I'm old. I haven't been able to read a menu inside a fancy cocktail bar in my whole life. So
yeah, it's true. It's true. Interesting. Yeah. I think that's definitely more of a trend now, though. So it's like it's kind of slowly starting to change. I've been in some really beautiful ones. San Francisco is a great city for some brightly lit cocktail bars. Even though they do have every city has their fair share of the dens. And DC, DC is starting to like really embrace that, really embrace some of the more open air stuff and the brighter concepts. So, totally. To be honest, I don't like being out super late at night. So if I'm gonna head to a bar for like a nice early happy hour, I like it to be a place where I can sort of enjoy the golden hour.
Same. So I'm exactly the same way. Like, I don't want to walk out and be like, oh wait, what is it? It's 5 a.m. How did that happen?
Exactly. Well, Ivy, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, for shedding some light not only on the book itself, but kind of some of the really, I think, deep and important work that went into putting it together. Can you just give our listeners all the ways to keep in touch with you in the digital space, social media, website, etc.?
Yeah, so it's all really easy. My website's ivymix.com, and on every social media platform, I'm just at ivymix. So that's why I'm the most active on Instagram, Twitter, kind of, TikTok, no, not at all.
Right, and Leyenda is Leyenda. So that's where folks can check out Leyenda. And Ivy, thanks once again for being on the podcast.
I really appreciate you having me. Thanks so much.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning. So remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was produced by Edie Frederick, with editing and sound design by Samantha Reed, spirited insights courtesy of Ivy Mix and her new book, Spirits of Latin America, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2020.